My parents told me they were broke when my son needed surgery. My sister just thanked them for her $80,000 BMW. 5 years ago, my son was diagnosed with a heart condition that required multiple surgeries. The first one alone cost us over $60,000 after insurance. My wife and I were drowning. We had just bought our first house and we were barely making ends meet as it was. I swallowed my pride and asked my parents for help. Not a handout, just a loan that I would pay back over time. My father sat me down and explained that they were struggling too. He said retirement had been harder than expected and they were living on a fixed income. He said he wished he could help, but they simply didn't have the money. I understood. I never asked again. My wife and I sold our house and moved into a small apartment. I picked up a second job delivering packages at night. My wife worked overtime every week for 3 years straight. We missed holidays and birthdays and school events because we were always working. We sacrificed everything to pay off those medical bills and keep our son healthy. Meanwhile, my sister Danielle lived a completely different life. She worked part-time at a boutique and somehow afforded a luxury apartment downtown. She went on vacations twice a year and always had designer bags and new clothes. I assumed she had a boyfriend helping her out, or maybe she was just better with money than I was. I never questioned it because I was too exhausted to care. Last weekend was my mother's birthday, and the whole family gathered at my parents' house for dinner. My wife and I showed up in our 12-year-old minivan and parked behind a brand new white BMW in the driveway. I figured one of my parents' friends must have come early. We walked inside and Danielle immediately ran over to hug our mother. She was glowing and talking about how grateful she was. She told my mom that the car was absolutely perfect and that she couldn't believe they got her the exact color she wanted. I stopped in the doorway. I asked her what car she was talking about. She looked at me like I was stupid and said the BMW in the driveway. She said Mom and Dad bought it for her as an early birthday gift. I looked at my father. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I asked him how much that car cost. He mumbled something about it being a special occasion. I asked him again. He finally said it was around $80,000. I felt my wife grab my arm. I could tell she was doing the math in her head just like I was. $80,000 for a car for my sister who works part-time and has no kids. But 5 years ago, they couldn't spare a single dollar to help save their grandson's life. I asked my father directly how long he had been giving Danielle money. He tried to brush it off and told me this wasn't the time or place. Danielle jumped in and told me not to ruin Mom's birthday with my jealousy. That's when my wife spoke up. She asked Danielle if she even knew what we went through. She told her about the surgeries, the debt, the second jobs, the apartment we lived in for 4 years, the birthdays we missed because we were working. Danielle rolled her eyes and said it wasn't her fault we were bad with money. My mother finally spoke. She said Danielle needed the help more because she was single, and I had a wife to support me. She said it wasn't fair to compare our situations. I laughed out loud. I asked her if she thought it was fair that we nearly lost our house, our marriage, and our sanity while they were writing checks for vacations and designer bags. My father stood up and told me to calm down. I told him I was done being calm. I asked him point blank how much money he had given Danielle over the past 5 years. He went quiet. Danielle went quiet. My mother looked at the floor. I asked again and told him I wanted a number. He finally admitted it was somewhere around $300,000. My wife started crying. I took her hand and walked out without saying another word. We drove home in silence. When we got inside, I sat on the couch and just stared at the wall for an hour. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. She said I was being selfish and that I had no right to embarrass them like that. She said if I wanted to be part of this family, I needed to apologize to my father and my sister. I read it 3 times. Then I called my accountant. Because what my parents don't know is that last month I was named partner at my firm. And the first thing I'm doing with my new salary is hiring the lawyer who handled their estate planning. I sit on my couch staring at my phone after reading my mother's text, demanding I apologize, and something shifts inside me from hurt to ice-cold clarity. My wife sits beside me in silence, her eyes still red from crying in the car. I open my email app and forward the text to Grant Moser with a single message, asking if he can meet first thing Monday morning. I don't explain anything else, and I don't need to. Grant has been handling my taxes and finances for 6 years, and he knows exactly what kind of year we've had with the partnership promotion. My phone rings less than 20 minutes later, even though it's Saturday night. Grant's name lights up the screen and I answer on the second ring. He asks if this is about what he thinks it's about. I tell him yes, I'm ready to discuss my parents' estate planning situation. There's a pause and I can hear him typing something on his keyboard. He says he'll clear his Monday morning schedule and bring someone who handles trust and estate law. I thank him and hang up. My wife reaches over and takes my hand without saying anything. Sunday morning, I wake up early and start researching estate planning lawyers in our area. I make coffee and sit at our kitchen table with my laptop, clicking through websites and reading reviews. My wife joins me after a while and helps me make a list of questions we need answered. Our son sits in the living room watching cartoons, completely unaware that his grandparents chose a BMW over his life. I type out questions about wills and trusts and inheritance laws. I need to understand exactly what legal options exist before I make any moves. My wife adds a question about whether gifts given during someone's lifetime count against inheritance. I hadn't thought of that, but it's a good question. Monday morning arrives and I drive to Grant's office downtown. The building is one of those newer glass towers that reflects the morning sun. I take the elevator to the 14th floor and walk into the reception area. Grant meets me at the door and introduces me to Vivian Hodges, a family law attorney he brought in for consultation. She's probably in her 50s with short gray hair and sharp eyes that miss nothing. We sit in a conference room with a view of the city. Vivian asks me to walk her through the entire situation from 5 years ago to now. I start with my son's diagnosis and the surgery costs. I explain asking my parents for help and my father sitting me down to tell me they were broke. I describe selling our house and moving to the apartment. I talk about my second job delivering packages and my wife's overtime for 3 years straight. Vivian takes notes on a yellow legal pad, writing quickly in neat handwriting. Her face stays calm and professional, but I see her grip her pen tighter when I get to the birthday party. I tell her about the BMW in the driveway, and Danielle thanking our parents for the exact color she wanted. I explain the confrontation, and my father finally admitting he'd given Danielle $300,000 over 5 years. Vivian stops writing and looks up at me. She asks me to repeat that number. I say 300,000. She writes it down and underlines it twice. Vivian explains that while my parents have no legal duty to give me money, there are several angles worth looking at depending on how their estate is set up. She asks if I know whether they have a will, a trust, or both. She asks if I'm currently named as someone who gets inheritance. I think back to 5 years ago, when my father mentioned something about estate planning during a casual conversation at Thanksgiving. He'd said something about meeting with Dominic Stratton, a lawyer who handles wills and trusts. I tell Vivian this and she writes down the name. Grant leans forward and asks if I want him to try to find out more about Stratton. I nod. Grant suggests we need to understand my parents' actual financial situation before deciding what to do next. He asks permission to pull together my own financial records from the past 5 years to show exactly what we gave up while they claimed they had no money. I agree right away. Those records will show the brutal reality of everything we lost. The house sale that cost us equity, my second job income, my wife's overtime pay, every missed birthday and holiday because we were working. Grant says he'll have something ready by Wednesday. Vivian adds that documentation will be important if we decide to take any legal steps. I return to work Monday afternoon and try to focus on my cases. I have a client meeting at 2, and I force myself to review the file beforehand. But my mind keeps going back to my mother's text. The words keep playing in my head. Selfish. Embarrass them. Apologize. I'm staring at my computer screen when Regina Wolfe stops by my office. She's been my mentor at the firm since I started as an associate 8 years ago. She asks if everything's okay because I seem off. I pause, then tell her the basics of what happened. She sits down in the chair across from my desk and listens with the same careful attention she gives to complicated legal problems. When I finish, she's quiet for a moment. Regina asks a question that hadn't occurred to me. She asks whether my parents' financial support of my sister could be considered an advance on her inheritance. She explains that in some states, big gifts to one child during the parent's lifetime can be counted when figuring out estate distribution. I feel something spark inside me. It might be hope. It might just be the chance of fairness. Regina says I should ask Vivian about it because it depends on state law and how the estate documents are written. I thank her and she tells me to take care of myself. She says family stuff is always the hardest. That evening, I sit down with my wife after our son goes to bed. I explain everything the lawyers told me, the options about estate planning, the questions about wills and trusts, the possibility that Danielle's gifts might count against her inheritance. My wife listens and then asks what I want the outcome to be. I think about it for a long time. I realize I don't want their money now. I want them to face what they did. I want them to understand they valued a BMW over their grandson's life. I want there to be real consequences for that choice. Not just words, not just apologies that don't mean anything. Real consequences that they can't ignore or explain away. My wife nods slowly. She says she understands. My wife brings up something I've been avoiding. She says we need to talk to our son about why we won't be seeing his grandparents for a while. He's 10 now, old enough to ask questions. We agree to tell him a version he can understand about grown-up disagreements. The next morning before school, we sit him down at the kitchen table. We explain that Grandma and Grandpa made choices that hurt our feelings, and we need space from them. We keep it simple. We don't mention the money or the BMW. We just say that sometimes adults disagree about important things. Our son is quiet for a minute. Then he asks if it's because they didn't help when he was sick. My heart breaks. I look at my wife and her eyes are filling with tears. I ask him how he knows about that. He shrugs and says he heard us talking about it once a long time ago. He says he knew they didn't help us. My wife pulls him into a hug and I join them. We tell him it's not his fault and that we're going to be okay. He nods against my shoulder and asks if he can still finish his breakfast. We let him go and he goes back to eating his cereal like nothing happened. But I know he understood more than we realized. Tuesday morning, I'm sitting at my desk trying to focus on a client brief when my phone buzzes. It's my father calling. I stare at his name on the screen and let it ring through to voicemail. A minute later, the notification pops up and I press play on speaker. His voice comes through calm and measured like he's talking to a difficult client instead of his son. He says we need to talk like adults about what happened at the party. He says I'm being unreasonable about something that happened years ago and that I embarrassed the whole family with my outburst. The way he calls 5 years of hell something that happened like it was a minor inconvenience makes my jaw clench. I save the voicemail and forward it to Grant with a note that this might be useful later as evidence of their attitude. My phone buzzes again almost immediately, and this time it's a text from Danielle. I open it and see a wall of text about how I've always been jealous of her success and how our parents were just trying to help her find her footing in life. She writes that I had a wife and a stable job, so I didn't need help the way she did. She says it's not her fault that some people are better at managing their lives than others. I read it twice to make sure I'm not imagining the casual cruelty. Then I screenshot every part of the message where she admits she knew they were giving her money while we struggled. I save the screenshots to a folder on my phone labeled documentation, and then I block her number. I don't need to hear anything else she has to say. Wednesday morning, I'm checking emails before my first meeting when one from Grant comes through with the subject line, Financial Analysis Complete. I open it and start reading the attachment. The numbers are worse than I expected. We lost approximately $80,000 in home equity when we sold our house quickly to cover medical bills. I earned an additional $45,000 from my second job delivering packages over 3 years. My wife's overtime added about $30,000 to our income during that same period. Grant's analysis shows that we paid off medical debt that would have been completely manageable with even a $20,000 loan. $20,000 while my parents were writing checks for $80,000 cars and luxury vacations. The math is right there in black and white and it makes me feel sick. I forward the entire analysis to Vivian with a message asking what our next steps should be. She responds within an hour, suggesting we request a family meeting with a professional mediator present to discuss the situation. She warns me that my parents aren't legally required to agree to mediation. She offers an alternative option of sending a formal letter through an attorney outlining my concerns and requesting they reconsider their estate planning given the obvious unfair treatment. I sit back in my chair and think about which approach makes more sense. Regina stops by my office again around 2 in the afternoon. She knocks on the doorframe and asks if I have a minute. I wave her in and she closes the door behind her. She tells me she did some research on Dominic Stratton, the estate lawyer my father mentioned using years ago. Apparently he's mostly retired now, but his daughter Fern Stratton took over his practice and specializes in trust management. Regina says if I'm serious about understanding my parents' estate structure, Fern might be willing to have an initial conversation about general estate planning questions. I thank Regina for looking into it, and she gives me Fern's office number written on a sticky note. She tells me to take care of myself and that she's here if I need anything. After she leaves, I add Fern's number to my phone contacts. Thursday night after our son goes to bed, I sit at the kitchen table with my laptop and start drafting a letter to my parents. Vivian sent me a template to work from, but I want the words to be mine. I write out the timeline starting from 5 years ago when I asked for help, and my father said they were broke. I include the financial impact on my family with specific numbers from Grant's analysis. I write about the missed birthdays and holidays, the years of working 2 jobs, the stress that nearly destroyed my marriage. I explain that the issue isn't about wanting their money now, but about the lie they told during the worst time of our lives and the ongoing favoritism that made that lie possible. I request a meeting to discuss how they plan to address the inequality in their treatment of their children. I state clearly that I'm consulting with legal and financial advisors regarding their estate. The letter takes me 3 hours to get right. It's formal and factual, but it's also honest about how much damage they caused. My wife reads it over my shoulder when I finish and says it's more fair and measured than they deserve. I save the document and email it to Vivian for her review. Friday morning, Vivian responds that the letter looks good and I should send it via certified mail for proof of delivery. I print it out at the office and take it to the post office during lunch. The clerk processes the certified mail paperwork and hands me the receipt. I fold it into my wallet next to my son's school photo. It feels strange sending such a formal document to my own parents. but their demand that I apologize showed me they don't understand the seriousness of what they did. Maybe seeing it in writing from lawyers will make it real for them. I drive back to the office and try to focus on work for the rest of the afternoon. My college friend Asher calls Friday evening after I texted him earlier in the week about what happened. He's a financial planner in another state now, and we don't talk as often as we should. He's angry on my behalf when I explain the whole situation. He tells me his parents did something similar with his brother, though not as extreme. His brother got help with a down payment while Asher got nothing. He says family money disputes get ugly fast, and that people's memories become very selective when inheritance is involved. He suggests I document everything in writing and keep copies of all communications. I tell him I'm already doing that, and he says good because I'm going to need that paper trail. We talk for another 20 minutes about other things before hanging up. It helps to know someone else understands what this kind of favoritism feels like. Saturday morning, my phone rings, and it's my mother calling from her cell. I consider letting it go to voicemail like I did with my father, but I want to hear her reaction to the letter. I answer, and she's already crying before I say hello. She tells me I'm tearing the family apart over money, and that she never thought I was the kind of person who would be so greedy. The accusation hits me wrong, and I stay very calm. I ask her a direct question. If our situations had been reversed, if Danielle's child needed surgery and they'd said no to her while giving me $300,000, would that be acceptable? Would that be fair? She goes quiet on the other end of the line. I wait for her to answer, but instead I hear a click, and the call ends. She hung up without responding to the question. I set my phone down on the counter and go find my wife to tell her what happened. Sunday afternoon is warm and clear, so I take my son to the park near our apartment. He runs straight to the playground and starts climbing on the equipment with other kids his age. I sit on a bench and watch him play. He's healthy and strong and full of energy. 5 years ago, we almost lost him. The surgery saved his life, but the cost nearly destroyed ours. A simple loan from my parents would have let us keep our house and maintain some stability during the scariest time of our lives. We could have been there for more school events. We could have had family dinners instead of passing each other between work shifts. We could have actually enjoyed watching our son recover, instead of drowning in debt and exhaustion. But my parents chose to fund my sister's designer handbag collection and luxury apartment instead. They chose a BMW over their grandson's well-being. And then they acted like I was being unreasonable for expecting basic family support during a medical crisis. My son waves at me from the top of the slide, and I wave back. He's smiling and happy and completely unaware of how close we came to losing everything. I'm grateful he doesn't have to carry that weight. But I'm never going to forget what my parents did to us, and I'm going to make sure there are real consequences for their choices. Monday morning, I check my email before heading to work and find a message from my father sitting at the top of my inbox. No phone call, no attempt at actual conversation. Just a cold email sent at 6 a.m. like he was handling business correspondence. I open it and read through his response to the letter I sent last week. He writes that their financial decisions are their own business, and that I have no right to question how they choose to spend their money. He says the letter I sent was disrespectful and crossed a line. Then comes the part that makes my jaw tighten. He writes that if I continue down this path, I'll regret it. The thread is vague enough to have plausible deniability, but clear enough that I know exactly what he means. He's telling me to back off or face consequences. I forward the email to Vivian immediately with a short message asking her to review his response. Then I get dressed for work and try to focus on the day ahead. My phone rings around 10:30, and it's Vivian calling back after reading my father's email. She tells me the threatening tone is notable and could actually work in my favor if things escalate further. She explains that his defensiveness and implicit threats suggest he knows his position is weak. She asks if I want to proceed with trying to get information about their estate structure, which would involve me reaching out to Fern Stratton directly. I don't hesitate. I tell her yes. I want to understand exactly what I'm dealing with before I make any more decisions. Vivian says she'll send me some guidance on what to ask and how to frame the conversation. She reminds me that Fern can't share confidential client information, but there are ways to request details as a potential beneficiary. I thank her and hang up, feeling like I'm finally taking concrete steps instead of just reacting to their attacks. Tuesday morning, I call Fern Stratton's office, and her assistant answers on the second ring. I explain that I'm the son of her father's former clients and need to understand some estate planning questions related to my own family situation. The assistant is professional and efficient, asking for my name and contact information. She tells me Fern has an opening Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock and asks if that works for my schedule. I agree immediately, and she schedules the consultation. I don't mention the family conflict yet, wanting first to understand what information she can legally share and how much she already knows about my parents' financial setup. After hanging up, I make a note in my calendar and try to prepare mentally for what I might learn. Part of me wonders if Fern will remember working on my parents' estate documents, or if it was just another routine file among hundreds. Work becomes a strange refuge over the next few days, where I can focus on other people's problems instead of my own. Wednesday afternoon, Cassius Donaldson stops by my office to check in on some cases I'm handling. He's the managing partner and technically my boss now that I made partner last month. He asks about my long-term goals with the firm and whether I'm interested in taking on more complex cases now that I have the title and compensation to match. I tell him I'm definitely interested in expanding my caseload, and he seems pleased. As we talk about future opportunities, I realize something that makes my chest feel tight. My promotion means financial security that my parents could have helped us achieve years ago if they hadn't been secretly funding my sister's lifestyle. The partnership salary would have seemed impossible 5 years ago when we were drowning in medical debt. Now I have it, but only because my wife and I sacrificed everything to climb out of that hole ourselves. My parents watched us struggle and chose not to help, and now I'm finally in a position where I don't need them anymore. The timing feels both satisfying and deeply sad. Wednesday evening, my wife and I drive to an office building across town to meet with Sabrina DeLeon, the therapist Grant recommended who specializes in families dealing with financial betrayal. The waiting room is quiet and comfortable, and Sabrina comes out to greet us right on time. She's probably in her 50s with kind eyes and a calm presence that immediately puts me at ease. We follow her back to her office and sit on a couch while she takes a chair across from us. She starts by asking how we're processing the anger and hurt from discovering my parents' deception. My wife's composure cracks almost immediately. She breaks down describing the years of exhaustion and fear, the constant worry about money, the guilt over missing our son's school events because we were always working. Sabrina listens without interrupting, nodding occasionally and taking notes. When my wife finishes, Sabrina turns to me and asks how I've been handling it. I admit I've been so focused on the legal strategy and documenting everything that I haven't fully processed the emotional damage. Sabrina says that's a common response and that sometimes taking action feels safer than sitting with painful feelings. She's right. Every time I start to feel the full weight of what my parents did, I redirect that energy into planning my next move or gathering more evidence. Sabrina spends the next 40 minutes helping us understand that our anger is completely valid, but that we need clarity about what outcome we're seeking. She asks directly if we want reconciliation, revenge, or simply acknowledgement of the harm done. The question stops me because I haven't really thought about it in those terms. My wife and I look at each other and I can see she's thinking the same thing I am. We both realize we want the same outcome. We want my parents to truly understand what they did and face real consequences, not just empty apologies or defensive justifications. We want them to sit with the reality that they chose a BMW over their grandson's life and that their favoritism nearly destroyed us. Sabrina asks what real consequences would look like to us, and I tell her I'm working on that through legal channels. She cautions that legal action might give us a sense of control, but won't necessarily provide emotional closure. I understand what she's saying, but right now, having some control feels necessary after years of feeling powerless. Thursday afternoon, I arrive at Fern Stratton's office 15 minutes early and sit in the waiting area reviewing the questions Vivian helped me prepare. At exactly 2 o'clock, Fern comes out to greet me. She's younger than I expected, probably early 40s, with a professional but warm demeanor. I follow her back to her office, and she gestures for me to sit in one of the chairs across from her desk. I start by explaining that I'm trying to understand estate planning in general because of a family situation I'm dealing with. She nods and asks what specific questions I have. I keep things vague at first, asking about the basics of wills versus trusts and how assets get distributed after someone dies. Fern is patient and thorough, explaining the differences between various estate planning tools and how families typically structure their plans. When I mention my father's name as someone who worked with her dad years ago, her expression shifts slightly. It's subtle, but I catch it. She pauses for just a moment and then says she remembers that file. My heart rate picks up because that small reaction tells me she knows more than she's saying. Fern carefully explains that she can't share specific client information without written permission from the clients themselves. I expected this, so I nod and tell her I understand the confidentiality requirements. But then she adds something interesting. She says that if I have concerns about estate planning fairness, I do have options available to me. She mentions that some states allow adult children to challenge estates if there's evidence of undue influence or if lifetime gifts to one child created significant inequality that wasn't properly addressed in the estate documents. Her wording is very careful and deliberate. She's not telling me anything about my parents' specific plan, but she's giving me information about what might be possible. I realize she's walking a fine line between professional ethics and trying to help me understand the situation. The fact that she's even bringing up undue influence and lifetime gifts suggests she knows exactly what happened with Danielle. I decide to ask a hypothetical question to see how much more information Fern will share. I ask what would happen if parents gave one child hundreds of thousands of dollars during their lifetime while refusing to help another child during a medical crisis. Would those lifetime gifts affect how the estate gets divided? Fern leans back in her chair and considers the question carefully before answering. She says it depends entirely on how the estate documents are written. If the will or trust explicitly states that lifetime gifts should be considered advances on inheritance, then yes, those gifts would be deducted from that child's share. But if the documents don't address lifetime gifts at all, they might be treated as separate from the inheritance, and the estate would be split equally regardless. She pauses and then adds that some parents deliberately structure their estates to hide inequality or avoid difficult conversations. Then she suggests something that makes my pulse quicken. She says I might want to send a formal letter to her office requesting information about whether I'm named as a beneficiary in my parents' estate and how the plan is structured. She explains that as a potential beneficiary, I have certain rights to information, though those rights vary by state. Friday morning, I sit down at my computer and start drafting a formal letter to Fern's office. I write it as a potential beneficiary, requesting information about my parents' estate plan and my status within that plan. I keep the language professional and factual, avoiding any mention of the family conflict or my anger at the situation. I simply state that I'm their son, and I'm requesting information about whether I'm named in their estate documents and how assets are planned to be distributed. When I finish the draft, I email it to Vivian for review. She calls me back within an hour and says it's exactly right. She tells me it's a smart move because it creates a clear paper trail and might prompt my parents to reconsider their position once they realize I'm serious about pursuing this. She also warns me that sending this letter will likely escalate the conflict significantly. My parents will be notified that I've requested this information, and they'll probably be furious. I tell her I understand and I'm prepared for their reaction. I make a few small edits based on Vivian's suggestions, and then print the letter on professional letterhead. I take it to the post office and send it certified mail with return receipt requested, knowing this will likely be the point of no return in my relationship with my parents. As I watch the postal worker process the letter, I feel a strange mix of determination and sadness. I'm fighting for fairness and accountability, but I'm also acknowledging that my family might never recover from this betrayal. Monday morning, the certified mail receipt comes back, showing my letter was delivered to my parents' address. I check my phone every hour, waiting for some kind of response. Around 2 in the afternoon, my phone buzzes with a voicemail notification. I press play and hear my father's voice tight with anger. He says I'm being ungrateful and selfish, that I'm trying to steal from them while they're still alive. His voice gets louder as he talks, saying they worked hard for everything they have, and I have no right to question how they spend their money. He says if I keep this up, I'll regret it, that family doesn't treat each other this way. I save the voicemail immediately because buried in his anger is something useful. He's talking about substantial assets, about money they have right now, completely contradicting his story from 5 years ago about being broke on a fixed income. I play it again and write down the exact phrases he uses. Then I forward it to both Grant and Vivian with a note saying my father just admitted on tape that they have significant wealth. Tuesday afternoon, I'm in the middle of reviewing a contract when my desk phone rings. I answer and hear screaming before I can even say hello. It's Danielle. Somehow she got my work number. She's yelling that I'm trying to steal her inheritance, that I'm a greedy bastard who can't stand seeing her happy. I lean back in my chair and let her rant for a solid minute before I speak. When she finally pauses for breath, I tell her calmly that I'm simply asking for fair treatment. I point out that if our parents had helped me the way they helped her, we wouldn't be in this situation at all. She starts screaming again, saying I'm just bitter because I'm not the favorite. The words hang in the air between us, and I realize something that makes my stomach turn. She actually believes this. She genuinely thinks she deserves preferential treatment, that being the favorite is a real thing that justifies getting $300,000 while her nephew nearly died. I tell her we're done talking and hang up. My hands are shaking slightly as I write down everything she said while it's still fresh in my mind. Wednesday morning, I find a thick envelope in my mailbox at home. It's from a law firm I don't recognize with an address in the suburbs near where my parents live. I open it standing right there in the parking lot. The letter is on expensive letterhead and written in formal legal language. It says my parents have retained their services and that I need to immediately cease and desist from harassing my parents or interfering with their estate planning. It threatens legal action if I continue my inappropriate behavior. The letter uses words like stalking and intimidation and makes it sound like I've been doing something criminal instead of just asking questions. I take photos of every page and send them to Vivian before I even get back inside my apartment. She calls me back within 20 minutes and I can hear the smile in her voice. She says it's a bluff, pure intimidation meant to scare me into backing down. She points out that I haven't done anything legally wrong. Sending a letter to an estate planning office asking about my status as a beneficiary is completely within my rights. She says we should respond with our own letter laying out the facts and my reasonable request for information. I agree, and she says she'll draft something for my review by end of day. Thursday morning, I meet Grant and Vivian together at Grant's office. We sit around his conference table, and Grant spreads out papers showing my parents' financial timeline. He's put together bank records, property records, tax documents that paint a clear picture. 5 years ago, when they told me they were broke, they owned their house free and clear, had substantial retirement accounts, and were making regular large transfers to Danielle. Grant points to specific dates where they gave Danielle $5,000 here, $10,000 there, $20,000 for her apartment deposit. All while I was working my delivery route at night and my wife was doing double shifts. Vivian looks at the numbers and says we could potentially pursue a claim of financial elder abuse against Danielle if there's evidence she manipulated them into giving her money. I shake my head immediately. That's not what this is about. Danielle didn't trick anyone. My parents chose to give her money while lying to me. That's on them, not her. I explained to both of them what I actually want from this whole thing. It's not about getting money now. I don't need their money anymore. I'm making good money as a partner. What I want is for the truth to matter. I want my parents to acknowledge that they lied to me during the worst crisis of my life. I want them to admit they watched us suffer when they could have helped. I want them to understand that their favoritism had real consequences, that it cost us our house and years of our lives and almost cost us our marriage. I want them to face what they did and understand that the relationship is broken, not because of money, but because of betrayal and cruelty. Vivian listens carefully and nods. She says that's actually harder to get than money, that making people acknowledge emotional harm is much tougher than winning a financial settlement. But she thinks we can make it very difficult for them to keep denying reality. Vivian suggests we prepare a detailed timeline and financial analysis to present to my parents. Something that lays out exactly what we sacrificed while they funded Danielle's lifestyle. The goal would be to make the reality so clear and undeniable that they can't rationalize it away anymore. Grant agrees to compile all the financial data into a clean format with dates and amounts. I volunteer to work on the emotional timeline, the list of moments and memories we lost because of their lie. Vivian says once we have both pieces, we can send it to them with a letter requesting a meeting to discuss fair treatment in their estate planning. She warns me that they might refuse to meet, but at least we'll have documented everything clearly. I leave the meeting feeling like I finally have a plan that might actually force some accountability. Thursday evening after my son goes to bed, I sit down at the kitchen table with a blank document open on my laptop. I start writing out everything we missed during those sacrifice years. My son's 5th birthday when I was working my delivery route instead of being at his party. Our 10th wedding anniversary that we spent in the hospital because we couldn't afford to take time off work. The school play where my son played a tree and I missed it because I was doing overtime. Christmas mornings that were rushed and stressful because we both had to work that afternoon. My son's first day of kindergarten that my wife handled alone because I was sleeping after working all night. Each memory is a small wound that my parents' lie made necessary. I could have been there for all of these moments if they'd just loaned us $20,000. Instead, they were writing checks for Danielle's vacation to Hawaii. When I finish my list, I show it to my wife and ask if she wants to add anything. She sits down and starts typing, and I watch her face as she remembers. She writes about the promotion she turned down because it required moving to another city, and we couldn't afford relocation costs. She writes about the friends she lost touch with because she was always working and never had time for coffee or girls' nights. She writes about giving up her painting hobby because we needed every dollar for medical bills, and art supplies felt like a stupid luxury. She writes about the guilt she felt every time our son asked why we couldn't go to the zoo or the movies like his friends' families did. When she finishes, we sit there looking at our combined lists. Together, they paint a picture of two people who gave up years of their lives, who sacrificed everything that makes life worth living, while my parents wrote checks for BMWs and designer handbags. Friday afternoon, I get an email from Fern's office. The subject line is formal and professional. The email states that my parents have instructed her not to share any information about their estate planning with me. That's not surprising given the angry voicemail and the lawyer's letter. But then I notice she's attached something to the email. It's a generic pamphlet about beneficiary rights and estate contests in our state. I open it and start reading the legal language about when beneficiaries can challenge estates. Several sections are highlighted in yellow. One section talks about undue influence and how lifetime gifts can be considered when determining fair distribution. Another highlighted section explains that beneficiaries have rights to information about estate structure if they can show reasonable cause. I read between the lines and realize what Fern is telling me. She can't give me information directly, but she's pointing me toward the legal framework that would let me challenge their estate if they've structured it unfairly. She's helping me without violating her professional ethics. Saturday morning, Asher calls to check on me. We haven't talked in a couple weeks, and I fill him in on everything that's happened since I sent the letter to Fern's office. The voicemail from my father, Danielle's screaming phone call, the lawyer's threatening letter, the meeting with Grant and Vivian. He listens quietly, and then asks me the question I've been avoiding. He wants to know what my endgame is, whether I'm prepared to be permanently cut off from my parents. I sit with that question for a minute before answering. I tell him I think we're already cut off. I just didn't realize it until the BMW showed me how little they value me compared to my sister. Being cut off from people who would watch you suffer unnecessarily isn't really a loss. It's just finally seeing clearly what was always true. Asher tells me that being cut off from people who never valued me equally isn't really a loss. It's just accepting reality. He says I'm better off knowing the truth now than spending another decade wondering why I never felt like enough. We talk for another 20 minutes, and when I hang up, I feel steadier than I have in days. Monday morning, I wake up early and review everything one more time. Grant sent the financial analysis on Friday, showing every dollar we sacrificed while my parents funded Danielle's lifestyle. Vivian drafted a letter that lays out the facts without sounding emotional or accusatory. I read through the timeline my wife and I created, all those missed moments and brutal years documented in simple sentences. The package is ready to go. I drive to Vivian's office and she has everything printed and organized in a professional folder. She's including the financial analysis, our timeline of sacrifices, copies of the text messages from my mother, and the threatening voicemail from my father, and a formal letter requesting a mediated meeting to discuss fair treatment in their estate planning. The letter makes it clear I'm not asking for money now, just acknowledgement and equality going forward. Vivian sends everything via her office to my parents' lawyer with delivery confirmation. By noon, I get an email from their lawyer saying he received the package and will discuss it with his clients. He says they're considering their options, which probably means they're trying to figure out how to make this go away, without actually addressing anything. Tuesday, I throw myself into work because sitting at home thinking about my parents just makes me angry all over again. I'm handling a partnership dispute case where two business owners can't agree on profit distribution, and it's weirdly similar to my own situation. One partner contributed more money up front, while the other contributed more labor over time, and now they're fighting about who deserves what. I spend the morning drafting arguments about fairness and equality and contribution, and the irony isn't lost on me. Regina stops by my office around 3 and comments that I seem sharper this week, more focused than I've been in months. I tell her that taking action instead of just feeling hurt has helped, that doing something concrete makes me feel less powerless. She sits down and tells me she went through something similar with her own family years ago. Her parents gave her brother money for a business that failed while refusing to help her with grad school tuition. She says setting boundaries with them was painful, but ultimately healthier than accepting mistreatment just to keep the peace. She says family relationships should be based on mutual respect, not obligation and guilt. Wednesday afternoon, my phone rings from a number I don't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something makes me answer. It's my mother, and she sounds different, calmer than the angry texts and the defensive birthday party confrontation. She says she got my package and she wants to understand why I'm doing this. I tell her I'm doing this because they lied to me when my son almost died, because they watched us sacrifice everything while they wrote checks for luxury cars and vacations, and because they still don't seem to understand why that's wrong. She starts crying and says they were just trying to help Danielle, that she needed support because she was alone. I ask her directly why Danielle's comfort was more important than her grandson's life. The line goes quiet for a long moment. She says it wasn't like that. They just thought we'd be fine because I had a good job and a wife to share expenses with. I point out that they didn't think, they assumed, and they never once checked to see if we were actually fine during 4 years of working ourselves to death. She says she didn't know it was that bad, and I tell her that's because she never asked. She never called to see how we were managing or if we needed anything. She just assumed we were fine while Danielle got $300,000. My mother goes quiet again, and then admits something I wasn't expecting. She says my father made the decision not to help us, and she went along with it because he manages all their finances. This adds another layer to the betrayal, because it means my father actively chose to deny us help while simultaneously writing checks for my sister. It wasn't just poor judgment or bad timing, it was a deliberate choice to prioritize one child over the other. My mother says she wants to fix this but doesn't know how, and I tell her that's something she needs to figure out, not me. I can't tell her how to make this right because I don't know if it's even possible. She asks if we can talk more later and I say maybe, then hang up feeling exhausted. Thursday morning brings an email from Danielle that surprises me. It's calmer than her previous screaming phone call and defensive texts. She writes that our mother is devastated by all this, and maybe we should all sit down and talk things through like adults. I read the email 3 times looking for an apology or any acknowledgement of the unfairness, but there's nothing. She's just suggesting we talk as if that will magically fix years of inequality and lies. She doesn't say she understands why I'm upset, or that she recognizes the disparity in how we were treated. She just wants everyone to sit down and presumably wants me to apologize for embarrassing them at the birthday party. I don't respond right away because would they actually listen, or would it just be another attempt to make me back down and accept things as they are? Friday evening, my wife and I have our regular session with Sabrina, and I bring up Danielle's email about meeting. Sabrina asks what I hope to gain from a family meeting and whether I believe my parents are capable of the kind of acknowledgement I need. My wife jumps in and says she's worried they'll just try to manipulate me into backing down, that they'll make promises they don't intend to keep just to smooth things over. She says we should only agree to meet if we're prepared for them to remain defensive and if there's a professional mediator present to keep things from turning into another screaming match. Sabrina agrees that mediation would be essential and asks me to think about my goals for such a meeting. Do I want an apology? Do I want them to change their estate plan? Do I want acknowledgement of the harm they caused? I realize I want all of those things, but I'm not sure they're capable of giving them. We spend the rest of the session talking about setting realistic expectations and protecting ourselves from further disappointment. Saturday morning, I respond to Danielle's email with clear conditions. I'll agree to a family meeting only if it's mediated by a professional and if everyone agrees to speak honestly about the financial history. I state clearly that I'm not interested in a meeting where everyone pretends this is just a simple misunderstanding or where I'm expected to apologize for being upset about their lies. Danielle responds within an hour saying she'll talk to our parents about finding a mediator. Her response is brief and doesn't address my conditions directly, which makes me think she didn't actually read them carefully or doesn't understand that I'm serious. The following week passes with no word about mediation. No emails, no calls, nothing. By Thursday, I realize my parents are probably hoping I'll just let this drop if they ignore me long enough. They're used to me being the reasonable one, the one who accepts things and moves on. Instead, I call Vivian and ask her to send another formal letter to their lawyer. This one reiterates my request for fair treatment in estate planning and notes their refusal to engage in good faith discussion. The letter states clearly that I'm prepared to contest their estate if necessary to address the inequality created by Danielle's lifetime gifts. Vivian sends it Friday morning, and by Monday afternoon, we get a response. My father's lawyer sends a proposal that catches me off guard. My parents will agree to mediation if I agree not to pursue any legal action regarding their estate while they're alive. Vivian calls me to discuss the offer and says it's actually a reasonable compromise because I can't force them to change their estate plan right now anyway. The law gives them complete control over their assets while they're living. What I can do is contest the estate after they die if it's structured unfairly, and this agreement doesn't prevent that. She says agreeing to their terms gets me what I want, which is a mediated conversation where they have to face what they did. I think about it for a day and then agree. We schedule the mediation for 3 weeks out, which gives everyone time to prepare and find a qualified mediator. Vivian says she'll help me get ready, and that we should treat this like preparing for trial, with clear points to make and evidence to present. I hang up feeling like I'm finally going to get the chance to make them understand, even if I'm not sure they're capable of really hearing me. I spend the next 2 weeks meeting with Vivian almost every other day. We sit in her office with stacks of papers spread across the conference table. Bank statements showing our apartment rent versus what we paid for the house. Hospital bills with payment plan schedules stretching across 3 years. My delivery company pay stubs from those night shifts. My wife's overtime records. Vivian helps me organize everything into a timeline that shows exactly what we sacrificed while my parents wrote checks for Danielle's luxury life. She asked me questions about specific moments, writing down my answers in neat columns. What were you doing the night of your son's 6th birthday? Working my delivery route until midnight. What happened when your wife's mother offered to help? We refused because we were too proud to admit how bad things were. Vivian tells me the goal isn't to make them feel guilty. It's to make them see the reality they chose to ignore. She says my father will probably stay defensive, but my mother might actually listen if we present the facts clearly. We practice my opening statement over and over until I can say it without my voice shaking. I write down the moments we missed and read them out loud until they sound like facts instead of accusations. My son's school play, our anniversary, Christmas morning. Every single one happened because we were working to pay bills my parents could have helped with. Vivian reminds me that staying calm will be more powerful than getting angry, that facts speak louder than emotions. The night before the mediation, I lie in bed staring at the ceiling. My wife sleeps beside me, but I can tell from her breathing that she's awake too. I run through every possible scenario in my head. My father refusing to acknowledge anything. My mother crying and making it about her feelings. Both of them walking out when they realize I'm serious about the estate planning. My wife rolls over and puts her hand on my arm. She tells me that whatever happens tomorrow, we already survived the worst part. We made it through the surgeries and the debt and the years of exhaustion. Nothing they say or do can change the fact that we're okay now. She's right, but I still want them to understand what they did to us. I want my father to look me in the eye and admit he lied when my son needed help. I want my mother to stop making excuses for choosing my sister over her grandson. My wife squeezes my hand and tells me to try to sleep. I close my eyes, but my mind keeps playing out different versions of tomorrow until I finally drift off around 4 in the morning. The mediation office is in a professional building downtown with generic gray carpets and motivational posters on the walls. Vivian meets me in the lobby, and we take the elevator to the 3rd floor. The conference room has a long table with chairs on both sides and windows overlooking the parking lot. Dr. Tiernan Finch arrives first, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and calm eyes. She shakes my hand and explains that her job is to help everyone communicate effectively, not to take sides or make judgments. She asks me to sit on one side of the table with Vivian while we wait for my parents. They arrive 10 minutes late with their lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit who introduces himself, but whose name I immediately forget. My mother looks smaller than I remember, her face tired and older. My father won't look at me, keeping his eyes on the table as he sits down. I notice Danielle isn't here and feel relieved because I don't think I could stay calm with her in the room. Dr. Finch starts by explaining the ground rules. Everyone gets to speak without interruption. We focus on facts and feelings, not accusations or blame. The goal is understanding first, then finding a path forward if possible. She looks at each of us to make sure we understand and agree. Dr. Finch asks me to present first since I requested the mediation. I open the folder Vivian prepared and take out the timeline we created. My voice stays steady as I walk through everything starting with my son's diagnosis 5 years ago. The first surgery costing over $60,000 after insurance. Asking my father for help, just a loan I would pay back. Him telling me they were broke and living on a fixed income. I show them the financial analysis of what we sacrificed after that. Selling our house and losing $80,000 in equity. My second job earning $45,000 over 3 years of night shifts. My wife's overtime adding $30,000 more. The apartment we lived in for 4 years. I read from the list of moments we missed. My son's 5th birthday when I was delivering packages. Our anniversary in the hospital. The Christmas mornings we rushed through because we had to work. Each one a direct result of not having the help my parents could have easily provided. Then I show them the timeline of Danielle's gifts during those same years. The luxury apartment downtown, the vacations twice a year, the designer clothes and handbags, the BMW that revealed everything. I explain that the issue isn't the money itself. It's the lie they told during our darkest time and the favoritism that made that lie possible. My voice doesn't shake when I say they chose a car over their grandson's life. When I finish, my mother has tears running down her face, but she's not making any sound. My father clears his throat and starts talking before Dr. Finch can say anything. His voice has that defensive edge I recognize from the birthday party. He says they made the best decisions they could with the information they had at the time. They didn't realize how hard things were for us because we never told them. I start to interrupt, but Dr. Finch holds up her hand and reminds me that everyone gets to finish. My father continues that they thought helping Danielle was more important because she didn't have a spouse or stable income like I did. He says they believed I would be fine because I had my wife to share the burden and a good job at the law firm. He completely misses the irony of saying Danielle needed help more when she was working part-time by choice while we were drowning in medical debt. He talks about how they wanted to give both their children support, but had to prioritize based on who needed it most. His lawyer nods along like this makes perfect sense. My father finishes by saying he's sorry we had a hard time, but they were just trying to do right by both their kids. My mother speaks next and surprises me by being more honest than I expected. Her voice shakes as she admits they made a mistake in not helping us 5 years ago. She says she's been thinking about it constantly since the birthday party, and she realizes now how much damage their choices caused. She talks about how she tried to bring it up with my father multiple times over the years, suggesting they should check on us or offer help, but he always said we were fine and didn't need anything. She admits she should have pushed harder or reached out on her own. Then she says something that creates visible tension between my parents. She's tried to talk to my father about changing their estate plan to be more fair, but he's been resistant because he doesn't want to admit he was wrong about how they handled things. My father's jaw tightens and he stares at the table. His lawyer leans over and whispers something to him. My mother keeps talking, saying she knows an apology isn't enough, but she wants me to understand that she sees now what they did to us. She wipes her eyes and looks at me directly for the first time since they arrived. Doctor. Finch lets the silence sit for a moment before she addresses my father directly. She asks him if he understands why his son feels betrayed by what happened. My father shifts in his chair and takes a long time to answer. He finally says he thought he was doing the right thing for both his children at the time. The words sound rehearsed like his lawyer told him what to say. I lean forward and ask him how giving one child $300,000 while telling the other he's broke during a medical crisis could possibly be doing right by both children. He doesn't have an answer. His mouth opens, but nothing comes out. Doctor. Finch doesn't push him, just lets the question hang in the air. The silence stretches so long I can hear the clock on the wall ticking. My father's lawyer starts to say something, but my father waves him off. He looks at me for the first time since we sat down, and I see something in his face that might be shame. But he still doesn't answer the question. Doctor. Finch calls for a break and everyone stands up. My parents and their lawyer go into a smaller room down the hall. I walk out to the lobby where my wife has been waiting. She jumps up when she sees me and asks how it's going. I tell her my mother seems to get it, but my father is still making excuses. She hugs me and says I'm doing great, that just getting them to sit here and listen is more than she expected. Vivian comes out and joins us by the windows. She says, Doctor, Finch is very good at what she does, and that my father's discomfort during that silence was actually a positive sign. When people can't defend their actions out loud, it means the truth is starting to break through their justifications. She tells me the second half will probably focus on concrete solutions rather than rehashing the past. She asks if I'm clear on what I want as an outcome. I tell her yes, I want them to acknowledge the harm they caused, apologize in a way that shows they actually understand what they did, and commit to fair treatment in their estate planning. Vivian nods and says those are reasonable requests that we should be able to get at least partially. We go back into the conference room and I notice my father looks different, more shaken somehow. My mother's eyes are red, but she sits up straighter. Doctor. Finch explains that she spent the break talking with my parents about what they heard during my presentation. She says we've reached a point where we need to discuss concrete steps forward, rather than staying focused on the past. She asks me directly what outcome I'm seeking from this mediation. I state it clearly the way Vivian and I practiced. I want acknowledgement of the harm their choices caused. I want an apology that demonstrates real understanding, not just sorry you feel that way. And I want a commitment to fair treatment in their estate planning that accounts for the inequality created by Danielle's lifetime gifts. Doctor. Finch writes this down and asks my parents how they respond to these requests. My mother agrees immediately to all three. She says she absolutely acknowledges the harm and wants to find a way to make things more fair going forward. My father hesitates, his hands flat on the table. He finally speaks and says he can acknowledge they should have helped us 5 years ago. He says he's sorry for the hardship we went through during that time. It's not quite the full understanding I wanted, not the admission that he lied or that he was wrong to prioritize Danielle. But it's more than I expected to get from him. He continues that he's willing to work with their estate lawyer to revise their planning so it addresses the inequality created by the gifts to Danielle. His lawyer makes a note on his legal pad. Doctor. Finch asks if I find this acceptable as a starting point. I look at Vivian and she gives a small nod. I tell Dr. Finch, yes, we can work with that. We work through the details for another hour, both lawyers taking notes while Finch guides the conversation. My parents' lawyer drafts language stating that any inheritance I receive won't be reduced by amounts given to Danielle. The $300,000 becomes an advance on her share, not a separate gift. My father signs the agreement with a tight jaw. My mother's hand shakes as she adds her signature. They also agree to cover our therapy costs, which Vivian makes sure gets documented in writing. I watch my father's lawyer make copies of everything, and I feel something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of letting go of the worst of the anger. Finch asks if we see potential for rebuilding the family relationship. I tell her honestly that I don't know. Trust takes years to build, and they destroyed a lot of it with their choices. My mother's face crumples, and she asks if she can see her grandson. I pause before answering. That's something my wife and I need to discuss as a family, I tell her. We'll decide over time what feels right. I'm not ready to pretend everything is fine just because we signed some papers. My father stands and shakes Vivian's hand, then leaves the room without looking at me. My mother lingers, touching my arm briefly before following him out. Vivian packs up her files and tells me I handled that well. I drive home feeling exhausted but also lighter somehow. The following week, Fern's office calls to schedule a meeting about the estate revisions. My parents instructed her to work with me directly, which surprises me given how my father acted at mediation. Fern is professional when I arrive at her office, explaining exactly how the revised plan will work. She walks me through the documents page by page, showing where Danielle's lifetime gifts get accounted for. The $300,000 will be deducted from her inheritance share. My share gets calculated as if I received equal gifts during their lifetime. It's technical and detailed, but Fern makes sure I understand every clause. She asks if I have questions, and I realize I have dozens, but they all boil down to one thing. Will this actually be enforceable when the time comes? Fern assures me the language is clear and legally sound. I approve the changes and sign where she indicates. I meet with Fern again 2 days later to review the final estate documents. The plan now explicitly states the $300,000 deduction from Danielle's share. My share gets calculated with an equivalent amount added. It's not perfect justice for 5 years of unnecessary suffering, but it's acknowledgement in legal terms that the inequality was real and needed correction. I read through every page twice before approving. Fern makes copies for my records and tells me the documents are now filed with the appropriate offices. I thank her and leave feeling like at least this part is settled. Over the next month, my mother reaches out several times. Text messages asking to meet for coffee, voicemails asking about my son. I ignore most of them at first, still processing everything that happened. Finally, I agree to a brief coffee meeting at a place near my office. She shows up early and orders for both of us. She apologizes again, her voice breaking as she tells me she's been thinking about all the moments they missed during our sacrifice years. The birthdays, the holidays, the everyday struggles they could have helped with. She seems genuinely sorry, and while I'm not ready to fully forgive, I appreciate that she's trying to understand. We talk for 40 minutes and it's awkward but not hostile. I tell her she can see my son occasionally, but we need clear boundaries. Supervised visits only for now. She agrees immediately and thanks me for giving her a chance. 3 months after the mediation, my wife and I are settling into something that feels almost normal. We're doing well financially with my partnership income. We started a college fund for our son last month. My relationship with my parents is cordial but distant, more like acquaintances than family. We meet for supervised visits every few weeks. My mother brings small gifts and my father stays quiet. Danielle and I haven't spoken since before the mediation. I heard through my mother that she's upset about the estate changes, but I don't care. I learned something important through all of this. Sometimes the best outcome isn't perfect reconciliation, but rather honest acknowledgement and fair treatment going forward. We're building the life we should have had 5 years ago. This time we're doing it with our eyes open about who we can actually count on. My son is healthy and happy. My wife and I are stronger for surviving what we went through. And I know now that family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up when things get hard.